P.L. Travers always said Mary Poppins popped into her head, but it was obviously an amalgam of many people she knew, you know, her aunt, I'm sure partly herself, people she met in Australia.
Despite saying she wanted anonymity after her death, Pamela Travers kept a secret hoard of pictures and papers from her earliest years. In accordance with her wishes, they were sold to a library in Australia. They supply a rich source of biographical material and the first link in a series of clues that took us to Travers' hidden past and the sources of Mary Poppins.
Pamela told me about her early life only when I told her I was going to Australia in 1991. In fact, until I told her I was going there, I didn't even know she was an Australian. She didn't want to remember too much about those early years.
She didn't acknowledge Australia that much, but she did have one thing that she said, which was that all the people, many people and objects in her early life were like a spindle around which she wove the threads of her imagination.
You often find that when people are successful in creating a childhood icon, it is because not so much they love children as they want to recreate a childhood for themselves that they never had.
We asked Pamela Travers' biographer to take us back through her early life in Australia to the places that provided the inspiration and tragedies behind the Mary Poppins books. Our journey began in Bowral, near Sydney, where the author spent her late childhood and her teenage years.
Pamela Travers came to live here in Bowral in 1907. She was just over 7 herself, and her father had just died in Allera in Queensland. The family then had very little money, so she moved with her widowed mother and 2 young sisters to live in this street, in Holly Street in Bowral, where she spent most of the next 10 years. The rent was paid for by Pamela's great-aunt, Helen Moorhead, who was a very important figure in the family life. And she shared many of the attributes of Mary Poppins. She carried a carpet bag, and she was known for her sayings like "split spot into bed." Pamela's mother came from a Scottish family, very confident in their wealth, in their position in society and their business acumen. She wasn't the most confident of the Moorhead clan. One evening when Pamela was around 10 years old, her mother suddenly left the house and said that she was going to run down to this creek and commit suicide. She was so distressed by the loss of her husband and the more straitened circumstances of the family. But she didn't tell the children, and Pamela, being the eldest, was the one that had to look after her little sisters and take them under an eiderdown, sit them down by the fire and try and comfort them, and tell them a story about a little white horse.
She made up a story that she knew was so important for her sisters and for herself to surround themselves with some kind of safety. And now I'm saying those words, I realize that that's another aspect of Mary Poppins. She surrounded that family with a kind of safety.
Feed the birds, tuppence a bag, tuppence, tuppence, tuppence a bag.
Barrels, much like Edwardian England, where the Mary Poppins books were set in the movie. Pamela found many characters in Bowral that she put into a Mary Poppins books. The most important of all was Mrs. Corrie, based on a little old lady that ran a shop in Bowral. Mrs. Corrie also painted stars on the sky every night with her big, tall daughters Annie and Fanny.
Go from the top again.
In November, the cast and production staff of the musical moved from Bristol to the Prince Edward Theatre in London for more rehearsals before the December 15th opening.
We're about 4 days away from playing to a paying audience in London, and a lot of work has to be achieved in a very short time.
Mr. Banks is here. Come in, Banks. Taking pictures. Shots on the line. Well, Banks, how did this happen?
I apologise for ruining the bank, but I do not apologise for understanding that there are more important things in life than making money.
The father figure in Mary Poppins' stories is a successful banker. In the film and musical, he achieves success. But going further back into Pamela Travers' own past, a very different picture emerges of her real father.
Pamela's father, Travers Goff, was a bank manager. He also had a drinking problem. So in 1905, the bank sent him here to Allerard, to this little town which was then a long way from anywhere. The family then lived in much reduced circumstances from the way they lived at his previous post in Maryborough, where they had many servants, but here they were reduced to one. Pamela lived here with her family in a small single-storey wooden house attached to the banking chamber. There was a maid, Kate, that had a parrot-headed umbrella. She would never say where she was going, and she would never say when she was coming back, just like Mary Poppins. Pamela lived here from the age of about 5 to 7. She was of the generation where children are seen but not heard very much, so she had to make up her own stories out here in the garden. This yard is where her imagination took flight. She was quite a lonely child in many ways, and I think she spent a lot of time out here. And what she did here, she said later, was make little tiny parks, little miniature parks for miniature people. And Jane Banks, the oldest child, played the same game as Pamela played in the backyard. Almost every story had a park in it. The Banks family lived by a park. The children went into the park.
Mary Poppins, Neely's inside and will live happily ever after, won't they? Of course. Mary Poppins, that was the best yet. To be up among the stars. Do you think we'll ever go back there? Oh yes, someday. Really? Will it be soon?
And Mary Poppins says no, not for a long time, because of course to her going to the stars mean, you know, visiting heaven, you're going to die. And this is a sense that I think exists throughout the novels, is that sense that death actually is present.
She had a fear of twilight. All her life she was terrified of the sun going down. Well, this is the grave of Travers Goff. He died when Pamela was just 7, and she spent the rest of her life really looking for him. Pamela had a fantasy that her father was born in Ireland and went to Ceylon to be a tea planter. He may have gone to Ceylon to be a tea planter. He was not born in Ireland, he was born in London. And then she believed she was brought up on a sugar plantation in Queensland. She wasn't. Her father drank so much, and in those moments he would recite Irish poetry to Pamela and his family. After her father died, she would sit at the window and stare out at the stars, thinking, he hasn't really died, he must be out there in the stars.
But you can always keep an eye on the stars until you return there. Stand there. Here. But it's your telescope. So it is. Keep it if you like, as a present. Thank you. Now run along in, it's getting cold.
That fascination with stars stays with her all the way through her life, so that in Mary Poppins there's hardly a page of one of the books which isn't sprinkled with stars in some shape or form.
I think for Pamela Travers the significance of the stars is that they are the unknowable, the unreachable, the spiritual. It's a kind of physical manifestation of what can't fully be understood.